Welcome to the Lote Notes Podcast, your briefing on the latest in fire, security, and cyber events shaping today's world. Each episode, we break down the stories behind the headlines, explore emerging risks, and bring clarity to the fast-moving landscape of safety and security. Whether it's real-world incidents, digital threats, or industry trends, we keep you informed, prepared, and ahead of the curve. Let's dive into this week's developments.
Before we begin, we want to acknowledge the victims, families, and the community affected by the tragic Bondi attack. We are sharing this analysis with the intention of learning, informing, and improving public safety, not to sensationalize tragedy. Our thoughts are with everyone impacted. This episode discusses violence and distressing events, so please listen with care.
Yeah, so with that introduction, welcome back to Lote Notes, the podcast. Today we are analyzing key points that we've made in our article, The Bondi Protocol. It analyzes a pretty sobering but critical case, the attack at the Chinooka by the Sea event in Bondi on the 14th of December 2025, and mostly looking at how this has completely changed our understanding in Australia of public safety.
Yeah, it is not an easy read. We're talking about an event where attackers exploited what's called the grey space to bypass traditional security measures and perimeters. It really highlights why the old methods and traditional methods of securing crowded spaces just aren't cutting it anymore.
Exactly. So at the moment, there is a current Royal Commission which is active, and it's investigating all of the circumstances surrounding the events that led up to the attack, but also happened during the attack. So no doubt there'll be a lot of detail that will be released to the public as a result of that. At the moment, though, with the information that we have, it's really about trying to draw out lessons based on what we currently know. So, having said that, we need to set the scene a little bit in terms of where this event happened. It was on the very famous Bondi Beach in December in Australia, which is the summer month. It's pretty much beach season. There are a lot of festivities and parties happening everywhere. And I think importantly, it was meant to be a quiet weekend gathering commemorating an ancient Judaic tradition, and it evolved into a horrific, nightmarish scenario. The event organizers had obviously taken care to enforce standard security measures. They established a security perimeter. They'd done their bag searches. There were measures in place to look at hostile vehicle threats. Unfortunately, in this case, the attackers didn't try to cross that line. What they did instead was that they planned an attack and operated from outside of that security perimeter.
Yeah. And instead they parked just 15 metres away from a heritage pedestrian bridge that overlooked the park where that festival was occurring. So our article notes that this bridge had an elevation of 15 metres, giving the attackers a clear line of sight into that crowd. So this is what we would call a multimodal attack, using improvised explosives and the higher powered rifles from an elevated position.
And really that's the crux of the failure here. The security team was focused on the 2D or the two-dimensional perimeter, which is basically a fence around the event, but the threat itself operated from that grey space area, which is really that three-dimensional space where the attackers scoped out and occupied a space which was nominally a public space, but it still had clear line of sight. It was 15 meters and elevated, but it was overlooking this venue. So it was technically outside of the event security's perimeter and their situational awareness of what was unfolding. And the other critical factor here was that the heritage brickwork on the bridge, that also meant that the attackers were protected ballistically during their attack, and it offered them that protection while at the same time giving them the vantage point and the range to inflict damage into the crowd.
Yeah, so just to reiterate, in our article we call these areas the grey space, or Zone X as another word. So these are places outside the venue's direct control but can critically impact the event, as we unfortunately saw take place. So the big takeaway is that security needs to conduct this red team thinking, which is looking at the venue through the eyes of an attacker to sort of spot these vantage points and these weaknesses so they can be mitigated before if an event was to occur.
Precisely, and for us as security professionals even, it is a terrifying shift in perspective.
Yeah.
And the same is true for event organizers that are looking to organize these special events, especially around festive seasons, where a lot of these events during the holiday period go outside, and they're events that are conducted within these spaces that aren't ordinarily used as full-time event venues. So, in other words, everything has to be set up from scratch. So our article critiques a lot of things, and we're looking at really drawing out what management strategies, security strategies, lessons that we can learn in hindsight. And I think that that's a critical point to make at this juncture, is that hindsight has given us this benefit of being able to look at what's happened and to critique it. Obviously, this is not taking away from the event organizers and even the people that were managing the security, the first responders, the emergency responders on the day, who all behaved in a very heroic manner. But this is all about, if an event like this was to be planned again, what could we do differently? And that's really what we're trying to get to the bottom of here. And one of the aspects that we look at is how a crowd behaves when an incident like this happens. Traditionally, from an Australian government perspective, there is guidance to run, hide and tell. And we want to have a look at this critically and examine whether or not this is adequate. On the one hand, yes, people need to know that something like this exists in terms of protocol, but also what does it mean when the event unfolds? How do you enact the run, hide and tell? And is that adequate to protect you from a situation like this?
Yeah, and even with that run, hide and tell model, even though it is government guidance, a lot of the general population may still not know about it. It's not as widespread as it maybe should be. And we can also argue that that same model may fall short for diverse crowds that include, children, elderly, people with disabilities, people who may not be able to just run when something like that happens. In the chaos that we saw at Bondi, people froze, panicked, or ran inadvertently into the direct line of fire. So our article proposes a different framework, which is ALICE.
Yeah, so I think with ALICE, it is an acronym, obviously, and it stands for Alert, Lockdown, Inform, Counter, and Evacuate. But within this framework, what we particularly want to focus in on and really enact as a protocol are the directives to observe, distance, and barricade. And this is really looking at the situation where, instead of running without instruction or understanding what's happening, the first thing that you need to do in an event like this, when you are in the midst of that panic, is to give yourself a quick couple of seconds and just observe and see what exactly is happening. Where is the attack coming from? What type of an attack it is? And then based on that, you then look at the next measures, which are to distance and barricade. So the goal really with observe is to identify the source of fire, The next step is to maximize your distance, but not just running blindly, but running with purpose and with direction, with an intentionality to put physical structures between you as ballistic cover in the case of gunfire. And that's what serves as the barricade. So in the case of Archer Park, we'd be looking at structures like the Bondi Pavilion to provide that ballistic cover.
Yeah. So this ALICE framework is more about being proactive rather than reactive. So our article essentially demands a paradigm shift. So moving from a fence mentality to that 2D view to a three-dimensional overwatch.
Absolutely. And look, that's a stark reminder that as these threats evolve and change, so too has our thinking, our planning, and our mindset when we're trying to deal with these kind of threats.
Yeah, and this is where our article really pivots from that diagnosis to prescription. So we are advocating to move away from the traditional run, hide, and tell model and instead adopting ALICE as a primary response framework for public venues.
Yeah, and ALICE isn't just about the acronym either. Like I've mentioned before, it is about the mindset, and it's about setting up a framework within which not just you're able to respond, but also the event organizers are able to train their security staff, the staff that are helping or in a customer service role at the event, and then distilling down to the very public themselves. So we want to delve into each of these steps within the ALICE framework, and starting with A, which is for alert.
Yeah, so alert, this is about specific actionable information. So not just providing vague alarms, not just saying that there's an emergency, which we might hear over that public announcement system. We point out that a public address system could have been used to say something like, threat located north of the venue, or evacuate south, stay away from the pedestrian bridge.
And I think critically within this situation, direction like that matters a lot. Because in the midst of a situation like this that unfolded at Bondi, the initial reaction may have been, look, it's just fireworks, because it was a festival, it was a celebration at that point. But then as soon as you start to see people falling down, panic setting in, your instantaneous reaction with the fight or flight response is to either freeze or to run. And I think that's where the direction really comes in, and the panic is reduced by that direction, because really ambiguity is what feeds that panic situation. It clears the cognitive overload, and you immediately give agency back to individuals to do something.
Yeah, so that level of direction really matters, especially in events like this. And moving on to L, which stands for lockdown. So this doesn't mean sort of hiding or curling up and hoping for the best. We reframe it as breaking the line of sight between yourself and the attacker or the emergency that's unfolding. So instead of telling people to hide, you tell them where to go. So again, reducing that ambiguity that we see inducing this panic. So something like, again, through the public announcement system, get behind the Bondi Pavilion, use solid structures as ballistic cover. This will really provide that sort of sense of direction and, I guess, in a way, reassurance to people that are being affected that, they know what to do.
Yes, and it's taking that proactive approach, which I think makes the difference, because it's not just about telling people, look, flee, run for your lives, but it's about that. It's not just concealment, it's also about seeking that protection. And that's critical in this situation.
Yeah, especially in open or coastal, as we saw at Bondi, or festival environments where traditional hiding places may not exist, using these solid structures that may provide ballistic protection, such as a wall that you can find even, really is critical.
Yeah. The next is to inform, and that's I within the ALICE acronym, and this is really possibly the most underutilized tool here, it's this continuous ability to inform the public as to what exactly is happening. And it's not just the public, but it's also working in concert with the event organizers, the customer service staff, the first responders, as I've mentioned, but also looking at broadcasting this message continuously to the public. And there are many different forms that communication can take as well during an event. We've already mentioned the PA system as a great way of doing this, but you can also look at other ways through social media or broadcast text messages like the police do, to provide information to people. And really the information is about empowerment, is to actually provide messages like police are on the scene, or there's a shooter moving west towards the bridge.
Yeah, and that kind of real-time situational awareness is really a necessity. So those texts or alerts can really help to unfreeze the brain during panic, and it can dramatically reduce panic-driven movement if these sort of techniques are done.
Yeah, and in our article we argue that this provision of information should not be something which is improvised on the day. It should actually be part of the communication plan. It should be already there and in place, so that as soon as an incident starts to unfold, you've automatically got this plan in place that starts to be enacted by people that are trained to do that.
Yeah, and that event planning is really quite a critical point that should be taken into account when planning for events. Now for the most confronting part, C in the Alice model, which stands for counter. And we want to be very careful here and make it clear that the countermeasure is not about heroics, it's about survival logic.
Yes, and I think here it is critical that if there are police present on site, if the security team are there and have the situation under control or are able to provide that countermeasure, that the public needs to keep themselves safe at all times. But at the same time, you don't just want to wait for that disaster. If you are cornered and your life is at immediate risk and there are no other options that you can see, then disrupting the attacker may be the only chance you have. And that's where you still want to offer that option and do that in a proactive way, so that there is some resistance and some fighting back against an aggressor.
Yeah, and in our article we reference a brave bystander at Bondi who moved to intervene and actually disarm one of the attackers. And that moment underscores the shift from being a passive victim in events like this to being an active participant in your own survival.
And just to re-emphasize this, that this is the last resort, it's the last choice. It's something that people should clearly understand, that the situation will demand it of them, and they will have to act in that instance, but they shouldn't, respond or throw themselves in the line of fire or put themselves in unnecessary risk.
Yeah, I definitely agree. You have to prioritize your own safety first. And last but not least, in the Alice model is E, which stands for evacuate. And it comes last and intentionally so, if you'd like to delve into that.
Yeah, so I think in terms of the evacuation side of things, interestingly, with Alice, it's the last step, whereas you saw with the run, hide, tell, it's the first step.
Yeah.
I think evacuation is all about that situational awareness. What we are calling for within our article is that event organizers work through the risks that they face with a licensed security professional, that they come up with a security plan, a communications plan that takes all of this into consideration, and they also look at things such as creating these safe zones or evacuation zones that may already have levels of ballistic protection. Obviously, with special events that are held in outdoor open areas, this becomes a lot more challenging.
Yeah.
But I think it's also critically important for the event organizers to bear that in mind and create these options, but also to instruct people so that they instinctively know where to go, how to evacuate, when to evacuate.
Yeah, it's about that sort of controlled evacuation. So once people understand where the threat is and where it isn't, that's when they would conduct the evacuation. And it's about giving those direct instructions as well. So exiting via South Campbell Parade is something that people know where they are going, like you mentioned. It increases compliance as well. So that ambiguity again causes freezing, direction restores that movement.
Yeah, and something that we draw upon a little bit in our article is also looking at behavioral and crowd modeling and what that means to how people react within these situations. And I think getting that research and that science behind it is also important when you are coming up with an emergency response plan. Moving beyond Alice, I think we've also touched upon in our article, and this is really critical within what we're talking about as the Bondi Protocol, is to switch frameworks from a two-dimensional fence-based security paradigm to a 3D spherical space that's centered on the event itself. And I think that this is part of this and part of the responsibility of event organizers and security teams is to be very careful as to what's happening within this broadened three-dimensional space that we're looking at. So it's not just the event venue, it's also any vantage points with the elevation, with the access, with sight lines reaching into your event space, and the ability to actually do things such as white level searches.
Yeah.
So what are these white level
A white
searches?
level search, this is about a coordinated or pre-event sweep that extends beyond the perimeter line of the actual event. So police dogs, police themselves, and security teams searching not just the immediate venue, but surrounding grey space. So that might be the bushes, bins, street furniture, or any sort of hiding spot 15 or 20 meters away. So this is particularly important as the Bondi attackers had IEDs that could have been planted hours before the event started.
Yes, and absolutely. I think on the point of the IEDs as well, the scary thing in the case of the Bondi situation, the Bondi attack, was that they deployed these IEDs with the intention of corralling people in certain directions. Fortunately, these IEDs didn't work. They didn't detonate, and what you had was a situation where they then basically moved on towards just opening fire into the crowd. I mean, the fact that the IEDs didn't detonate has probably saved a lot of lives as well, but at the same time, it just adds to the urgency of the level of planning and thinking that security professionals and event organizers need to now be aware of as they start to scope out their standard search perimeter, move beyond that to this three-dimensional search, and not just looking at the time of the event. You've got to sort of do this progressively in the lead up to the event and maybe run several searches over the days leading to the event.
Yeah. And with those sort of standard perimeter searches, a standard perimeter search in this case may not have detected the improvised explosives. A white level search could have. And moving on, so security as a process, not a product. So this is something we want to sort of discuss. So one of the most powerful analogies in our article compares public event security to airline safety demonstrations.
Yeah, and look, I think with airline safety demonstrations, a lot of us travel on airlines all of the time, and we often don't listen to the demonstration, or we're doing other things, looking at our devices or reading a book or what have you. But I think the airline industry does set a very good precedent in terms of the culture and the training that they bring into handling those emergencies. They do this so many times, and they've distilled their message, and it's communicated to the public, not just through spoken word. There's often videos. There's also demonstrations with the aircrew actually pointing to where people can find their safety vests, what you do in the event of landing in the water, how you wear your seatbelt. All of this is demonstrated in front of people. So even if you're not paying attention all of the time, you still instinctively know what to do. If there is smoke in the cabin, everyone kind of knows, okay, look, I've got to find my exit, I've got to look for the lights leading to the exit, and yeah, I know where my closest exit is. And really that's what we are looking for in terms of the cultural shift that needs to happen with these special events planning.
Yeah, and that's what our article argues, that sort of culture and behavioural conditioning should exist not only in the airlines but at festivals, beaches, any sort of public gatherings where, say, if the music stops and an alarm sounds, people should already know where to go based on this training and culture.
Yeah. Another aspect that we delve a little bit into within our article is really to ask people to think about looking at security differently in Australia, because I think sometimes we get a little bit too complacent. We often wrongly assume that gun violence is a very US-centric thing, but I think, like, even from our own history, if we look back at Port Arthur, the Christchurch massacres, and then also now moving on to Bondi, we can see that gun-related violence is a serious threat and something that, yes, it's a global threat. It does happen a lot in the US, but it also happens within our geography. And I think taking that seriously is an uncomfortable truth. And it's really something that within the context of this attack, we need to start to implement measures and training so that within security plans, we are actually anticipating and instinctively know what to do if something like this would happen again.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, these threats are global. The ideology behind attacks is global. Technology is global. So the uncomfortable truth is that these attacks are not isolated anomalies. They're part of a broader pattern. And I think they have worked as a sort of wake-up call. More people are realizing that the traditional security measures may not be enough anymore. Threats are constantly evolving, and our security measures need to, quite frankly, keep up. For example, with technology capabilities, technology was present at Bondi. There was a hobbyist drone that actually captured the horrific events of the attack in real life, but the technology alone could not prevent violence. Say the event planners had thought about having this technology, a drone or surveillance cameras could have informed security, allowing this suspicious behaviour of the attackers to be noticed before the attack begun.
Yeah, and I think with all up, this really brings us to the core message in our article, the Bondi Protocol, that security is not something that you can buy. Security is not something which you can bring in at the last minute. It's not based on you hope that the best will happen. It's really something that you need to continuously plan. You need to take on a risk-based framework, and adopting a security risk management framework is one of the recommendations that we make repeatedly in our article, and something that event organizers need to take very seriously. There are a lot of options for how you can educate yourself on these security risk frameworks. You can bring in security consultants to help you with this, but you can also reach out to law enforcement with, and as event organizers, if you're working with local councils, with law enforcement, and they're aware of your event and they know that you've got a security plan in place, that makes your event a lot more resilient to incidents like this happening. And I think beyond the continuous planning, we also want to make sure that your team is trained. And I think that training is an element which we often take very lightly. Often training is associated with online refreshers, simple assessments that anyone can complete and forget very easily. But I think with what we're calling for is that training needs to almost be drilled in, so that your events team, your security team, they're almost rehearsing, and they're communicating, and they're also able to adapt their plan, because no emergency or no situation, no attack unfolds the exact same way. Things will change dramatically. A gun-based attack or an armed attack can evolve into an IED-based attack. So you can have hybrid threats being deployed, you can have drones being used in the attack. So really it's about taking all of these elements, all of these risks, formulating a risk framework within which you're operating. And unless your entire team is kind of working off that same game plan, the response is always going to come up short. And that's really the takeaway that we want to instill here. And with the Bondi Protocol, we hope that this will be adopted by events organizers, but also thinking beyond the two-dimensional space and moving into understanding gray zones, understanding the gray space, looking at human behavior, looking at what happens in communication under stress. All of these elements need to come together and make your security plan, and that's really what the Bondi Protocol is about.
Yeah. Thank you for your time today, and to those listening, thank you for listening to the Lote Notes Podcast. Stay safe.
Now that we've wrapped up our discussion on security and the ways we protect people from external threats, it's a natural step to look at another critical aspect of safety. Not all risks come from intentional harm. Some arise from the environments we live and work in every day. With that in mind, we're shifting our focus to fire safety. It's a different topic, but it carries the same goal: safeguarding lives and ensuring resilience. Let's dive into the next segment.
Before we begin, we'd just like to acknowledge the lives lost in the Wang Fu Court, Hong Kong fire, big fire, apartment fires, and the families and the communities affected by this tragedy. Our thoughts are with everyone that was impacted, and in this episode we'd like to just discuss the distressing events involving the loss of life, so please just listen carefully, and we'll try and get to the lessons learned, what causes the fire, and just where we go from here as a global fire safety team. So I've got with me Amir, who's one of our principal fire engineers, and Amir?
Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today we're unpacking one of the most devastating high-rise fires in recent history, the Wang Fu Court apartment fire in Hong Kong.
So this tragedy took 168 lives and has major implications for countries everywhere, including Australia. So we'll break down what happened, why it happened, where and what lessons we can learn, and what we need to urgently apply to our regulations, as well as what we can sort of learn from the incident as. Yeah.
So let's start with the basics. Wang Fu Court was huge, 8 towers, each 31 stories tall, with more than 4,600 people.
And importantly, nearly 40% of the residents were over 65 years of age. So this becomes a major factor when we talk about the evacuation challenges later on in the piece.
Yeah, so it is important to note that at the time of the fire, the buildings were undergoing major remediation work on their exterior walls.
So what exactly happened? On the 26th of November in 2025, last year, a fire broke out in one of the blocks, and within minutes, I'm sure we've all seen the footage. It was spreading vertically up the facade rapidly, and within hours, there were multiple towers burning.
And the reason for the rapid fire spread, investigators identified 3 major factors.
The first factor was the scaffolding netting that was substituted with a cheaper, more non-fire retardant version. Expanded polystyrene foam boards were also being used as temporary window protection.
And bamboo scaffolding, common in Hong Kong, acted like a ladder for the flames.
The second factor was the arrangement of the netting and the scaffolding, which created a vertical tunnel. So once heat accumulated under them, the flames were just sucked vertically up the facade, and it's exactly what we saw on Grenfell Tower many years back.
So the third factor was extremely shocking. The fire alarms had been intentionally disabled by the contractors for convenience, and the residents had no warning.
So, looking at the various factors that we've just discussed, we can sort of draw some similarities to what Australia does and what the different approaches are in Australia. Yes, in Australia we do have practice guidelines for occupied buildings, which Amir will touch on a bit later. But after the Grenfell incident, Australia actually launched a proactive cladding remediation programs.
Meanwhile, Hong Kong only updated its standards after another fire in China, 1 month before Van Phuc Court. That reactive stance cost time and ultimately lives.
Further, just to add, Australia actually requires sprinklers in apartment buildings over 4 stories. The Hong Kong, on the other hand, still uses the older 25 meter threshold, which we still have in Australia, but after the Bankstown fires, we sort of changed our regulations. So, but what can Australia and the rest of the world actually learn from this event?
Well, simply put, disabling fire alarms without safeguards should not be allowed. If a system needs to go offline, there must be temporary alarms in place or a fire watch.
Secondly, Australia's population is also aging, much like Hong Kong's, and high-rise living is increasing. Emergency planning under the Australian Standards AS3745 needs a stronger focus on mobility impaired residents and elderly people.
Exactly. And another huge issue in Australia is that we don't currently have reliable safeguards ensuring materials installed on site are the ones approved during design. In other words, product substitution is common.
And without mandatory fire safety engineering oversight during facade remediation, unsafe substitutions can go unnoticed, like exactly what happened in Hong Kong.
So Grenfell taught us that combustible facades can be catastrophic. Van Phuc Court reinforces that lesson.
And we cannot wait for tragedies to drive reform, so proactive regulations is the only option, which is what we saw here, which is the approach we adopt in Australia.
So in closing, I'd like to bring the listeners' attention to a couple of good practice guides, which are already present in Australia, which should be more actively used. So there was a Society of Fire Safety Practice Guide for fire safety during construction, which was first developed in 2012. This guide was again revised in 2022. So I encourage all our listeners to go to the Society of Fire Safety website and download your free copy of the practice guide for fire safety during construction.
Every decision in construction and regulation affects real lives, and the price of getting it wrong is just simply too high.
To the 168 people who lost their lives, we honor them by learning, improving, and never repeating these mistakes.
Thank you for joining us today. Stay safe and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Lote Notes Podcast. If you found today's insights helpful, be sure to subscribe and share the podcast with colleagues who care about fire safety, physical security, and cybersecurity. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and join us next time as we continue tracking the events and trends shaping the world of safety and resilience. Until then, stay safe and secure.